Hello, everyone. I thought we'd get started on this week's live stream. I'm just making sure that it is streaming all at your end and the sound is okay. So, assuming the sound is working okay, if someone could just tell me in the chat that it's working. We've used this new microphone now, so hopefully it's a lot clearer. If your sound is still quiet, I have put this guidance on the screen to make sure that the volume on the YouTube thing is up. So as usual, this is our weekly recap. What's been going on in the markets? An awful lot has been going on over the last week. Loads of volatility. We had the payrolls out about an hour ago, so we've got lots to talk about. So just to explain, if you haven't attended these before, for those of you who do attend them, thanks very much. It's good to see the support we get. I do enjoy doing them, and it does point up some markets that I don't normally look at that have been interesting. I did a sterling yen trade, I think I said last week, from a few weeks ago, because it came up in the stream. Someone asked about it, and it's been probably one of my better trades over the last few weeks. But the way it works is a quick chat about what's been going on over the last week, which markets have been moving, what's happening next week, the major events to watch next week, and then we'll jump into looking at charts and stuff. So we look at indices, major FX pairs, gold and oil, Bitcoin. There's something else I can't remember, I've forgotten about. Crude oil is the other one, silver. And then we'll go into the chat, and any markets you want looking at, we will look at those as well. If you put it once in the chat, I will get to it. You don't. A few weeks ago, someone was spamming the chat. We'd talk about silver. We will get through all of this. Today runs for about an hour. Let's get started. So this presentation is only for educational purposes. It does not contain and should not be construed as containing investment advice or an investment recommendation or an offer of or solicitation for a transaction or any financial instrument. David Jones and Capital.com accept no responsibility for any use that may be made of these comments and for any consequences that result. Spread bets and CFDs are complex instruments and come with a high risk of losing money rapidly due to leverage. 71.2% of retail investor accounts lose money when spread betting and or trading CFDs with this provider. You should consider whether you understand how spread bets and CFDs work and whether you can afford to take the high risk of losing your money. A special offer of the day. We always have an offer. I thought of this earlier this week, actually. I thought it'd be a good market, and it's been really volatile week. But whoever keeps asking about polypropylene in the questions, can you just stop doing it? We've got this zero spread on copper for today. Really volatile week for copper. Had been a great trend. We will take a look at that. But if you're a client of ours and you trade whatever markets, if you trade copper today, it's going to be zero spread. If you open an account, hang on a second. If you open an account today, you can trade copper on zero spread till 6 p.m. This evening. Right, important events for next week. I mean, there's been an awful lot going on for last week. It's been crazy the last week, I think. My own profit and loss has been absolutely all over the place this week. I'll talk more about that as we go through, because I've been following big trending markets, and we've seen some big reversals over the last week. But let's get into that when we look at this. Next Monday, Bank of England governor speech. That could be interesting, given the talk about inflation and a focus very much on central banks and interest rates in the last week or so. Next Tuesday, we've got Eurozone GDP numbers. They come out. Wednesday, inflation is very much the topic of the moment. And on Wednesday, we've got a double helping. We've got China inflation in the early hours of the morning and US inflation later on in the day. And then on Thursday, I've spelt that wrong, but it's the interest rate, not the intraday rate. It's the European Central Bank interest rate decision on Thursday. No changes expected, of course, but it will be quite interesting, potentially, what they say around that in the press conference. So there's some of the major things to watch for next week. Stock markets. NASDAQ erases the gains for the year. So lots of talk about crashes. I think it's overdone, the talk about market crashes. I mean, clearly the tech stocks have been the hardest hit. We'll get into this though, but NASDAQ, the headline one, has erased its gains for the year. And it's this jump in bond yields continue to spook markets. So there is a feeling that we haven't had to worry about inflation for what feels like an awfully long time, for quite a few years. There is a worry that inflation is going to come back, perhaps as the year unfolds. The Federal Reserve, the US Central Bank, has said it's quite happy to let inflation run, but there's a feeling that they will actually pull back stimulus if we see inflation problems. Anyway, that's been what's been spooking markets over the last week or so. I should mention the payrolls. We had those US unemployment numbers, didn't we, about an hour ago? Came in massively, well, I suppose massively better than expected. Expectation was for about 180,000 jobs to be added in February, and the actual number was 379,000. So you'd expect that has given markets a bit of a boost, but we'll look at the markets in a second. Gold and silver, new lows for the year for gold. We saw it crashing through that big support a week ago, 1760 gold, and it's carried on. So we'll take a look at that, of course, as well, gold and silver. Bitcoin, no new highs in the last week, but consolidates around 50,000. That should be, not $50. 50,000 is where we're seeing Bitcoin consolidating. We'll take a look at that. Crude oil, what a week for crude oil. I do still have, actually you'll see it in a minute, some crude oil trades. Continues to push higher. I think, OPEC's commitment to not raising production was a catalyst here. But 13-month highs, absolutely. It's saved my bacon a bit in my own account, I think, this week, having some crude oil trades, as everything else has gone the wrong way. And the dollar, I've talked a bit about this all this year, whenever we've done a gold video normally, saying, well, could the dollar make a comeback this year? And we have seen strength in it this week. So we will take a look at it. It has put pressure on the pound and the euro and the Aussie this week. We'll take a look at that. But I do think, could that be the story for 2021? One of the stories from a market's point of view, that the US dollar makes a comeback. We'll take a look at that as well. Okay, so that's it. Let's jump onto the platform. So I said oil has sort of saved my bacon in my own personal trading. I think over the last week has helped mitigate some of the hits I've taken elsewhere. And it's the same in this account as well. You can see this is the account that I use for the various videos that we do. If you watch on our YouTube channel, there you go. So you're watching on our YouTube channel now. We're very close to 100,000 subscribers. If you don't subscribe, it would be great if you could subscribe. We do all these videos every week, as well as the live stream. But I do these trades, and it's oil. You can see we're running nearly, £1,900 worth of open profits on oil from the various trades taken this year. Done incredibly well, crude oil. Everything else, not so much. The equity, that's the important number to watch. I think a week ago it was at 17,000, the account equity. You can see dropped a bit, 400 quid over the last week. So some losses taken and stuff, but we'll look at some other markets where maybe there could be opportunities. Let's start off with the NASDAQ. Let's kick things off with the NASDAQ, because there's a lot of talk that the NASDAQ is in correction zone because it's dropped 10%. I have to say, I do think that these arbitrary percentages that qualify is something in a correction, is it in a bull market, is it in a bear market, are pretty meaningless. So whilst it might make for a nice story, the NASDAQ is officially in a correction. I'm not quite sure who decides that 10% down is officially a correction. It might make a nice story. Wouldn't put much weight on them. But this is where we are in the NASDAQ. So here's our NASDAQ 100, of course, the broader technology-based index. We saw the market push out just less than a month ago, 16th of Feb, all-time highs for the NASDAQ, and here we are 2.5 weeks later, quite a bit below those all-time highs. So it's broken through the trend line. Now, I do look at, I'm a big fan of following trends. I'm not completely tied to following trend lines. And I think just because a market breaks below a trend line doesn't necessarily mean that trend is over. If we picked up on the trend within the trend here, for example, that in May through to September, just because it fell out that trend line, it did carry on going up eventually, just at a bit of a slower rate. So for me, I'm not getting too excited at the moment by the NASDAQ falling below its trend that's been going since March, because it had a little go below it last week, it rallied and it's pushed back. I would be tempted in stock markets to be looking for buying opportunities. Perhaps not today, but definitely early next week if we see some stability at these levels. Because I think, again, we need to look at things in perspective. It's only about 2.5 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago the NASDAQ hit an all-time high. Markets don't normally do handbrake turns and completely change the trend. So maybe if we are going to see a new downtrend form, we have a bit more chopping around at these levels. But I would be tempted to be a buyer down here. I think we've got good support from mid-December, I think it is, and around about 12,220, which is clearly 260 points below where we are now. But yesterday, the market moved 500 points. So having a 200-point plus stop on the NASDAQ, if we're looking for a bounce back, is not ridiculous. It's all about position sizing. If you do 200 points at £1 a point equivalent, you've only got £200 risk. If you do 20 points at £100 a point, your risk is completely different. So for me, it's all about setting stop losses that are right for the volatility of the market. And clearly we are in a pretty volatile phase for the market. So I think it is interesting down here to see, do we see the lows pretty much from yesterday as well, but let's say from 12 to 20 through to today and yesterday's lows around 12,300. Do these hold? So I think it could be an interesting one to watch for a potential bounce back next week. Your screen is not as bright as before. I think that could be your end because I haven't changed anything with my screen, so maybe it's your brightness. Just a question in the chat. If you're a fan of RSIs, we have a 10-day RSI down here on the NASDAQ. I would say, I think RSI overbought, oversold. I think that can be not that useful. But what we do have going on with the NASDAQ is the idea of divergence, where the market has pushed to a low, the market pushes lower still, but the RSI is making higher lows, which again can be a suggestion the trend you're following could be running out of steam. The downtrend in this example, the weakness, might be running out of steam. So I think this is a really interesting market to watch today. If there's one market to watch for the rest of the day, perhaps it's the NASDAQ, to see what happens down here. Are we going to see some stability? Let's take a look at the really short-term chart. Again, I'm not usually a fan of the 5-minute charts, but let's have a look. So yesterday, these were the lows from yesterday, about 5 to 7 UK time, 12,300-ish. Came back to it early hours of the morning. Here's the payrolls, when the payrolls came out. So the market dumped initially on the payrolls. As I often say, you'll often get this like a headless chicken move on big announcements. Dumps and thinks, actually, this is quite good. I suppose an aggressive trade could be to be a buyer of the NASDAQ now with a stop loss underneath the payrolls low, which is still 120 points away from where we are now. And it was an hour ago. Yeah, so I think that's an interesting one to watch down here. So that's what I think. I still think we could well see these markets crawl their way back up. Maybe we're not going to see it rocket up to 14,000 next week, but I wouldn't just yet think the bull market is over for stocks. Let's see what happens. S&P, the broader US stock market, of course. There we go. So similar sort of squiggles going on in the S&P. So the S&P has been knocked back to 3780, which is where it was at the 2nd of February. So the S&P has given up a month's worth of gains. So again, I would say it's maybe a bit too early to start worrying about a bear market, for example. And again, I think we could well see this market claw its way higher. So I think it's interesting down here. It's interesting for me where we end up today. Okay, so where do we end up today? Do we hold above yesterday's lows? So I think stock markets are interesting. Let's take a look at the DAX. I'm sure the DAX, the German market, I'm sure it made very briefly, another all-time high this week, which is amazing when you consider the craziness we've seen. So the previous all-time high was the 8th of February in the DAX, the German stock market, 14,190. It traded to 14,195 this week, the DAX. So it's been a bit of a weird year so far for the DAX. You can see it's been almost treading water while US stock markets have been moving higher. But a big update today. So let's see if next week can the DAX break through 14,200. Let's see what happens. And finally, for individual stocks, the Nikkei. Let's take a look at the Japanese market, the Nikkei 225. I do have a trade on the Nikkei, and it has been a bit underperforming, to say the least, over the last week. But again, a bit like the Nasdaq, I think we've got this sharper trend of the Nikkei off the early November lows. Fell below the trend line the last couple of days, but again, for me, we're still well above this late Jan low. The late Jan low is at 27,500, near enough, so 1,400 points below where we are now. I would still be thinking perhaps we'll see some stability come in. So I think it's really interesting. We've seen a burst of volatility in stock markets over the last week. We've broken some trend lines. We haven't broken major support levels. Do we see some stability come in today? So that's what I'd be watching. I personally, I would not going to trade any of them today, but we'll see where it is when we come in next week. So lots of volatility, markets being spooked by this, stock markets being spooked by the jump in bond yields and what that means for inflation and central banks stimulating the economy. Let's move on. Next one, crude oil. Who would have thought it? And even as we speak, it's pushing out to fresh recovery highs, crude oil. So crude oil, amazing, really. Where was it a week ago? What was it a week ago? It was the 26th a week ago. So this time last week, it was about $61.40, and now it's nearly $66. Absolutely amazing few days this week. And again, this actually is a great way of illustrating what I'm talking about. It's a different trend. It's a much sharper trend from Feb, but the market fell below it beginning of March, and bang, has recovered and pushed out to new highs. So it's really interesting. Where we are now on crudes, I do think this is a bit of a danger zone, and I'm long crude in this account and long crude on my own as well. Bit of a danger zone. We have cleared the 2020 highs. So now, as we speak, crude oil is trading at its best levels since April 2019. So that is a 22-month high. So yeah, absolutely incredible run in crude. I always find it difficult to trade these runaway markets like this. I think you can sit there, and we've got to redraw that trend line. You can sit there and wait for a pullback. The risk is the pullback never happens, and you sit there, watch the thing go higher and higher. You can just buy it now at 65.89, wherever it is. The problem I always have is, where does your stop go? The absolute tightest I'd want my stop is just below these lows from last night, which is still, what's that, $2.60 away. But an incredible run for crude. The incredible run continues. Actually, what I'm going to do, I should probably move I'll do it after we've done this, move the stops on the existing positions we've got on this account. But it's a great run for crude. I mean, the November lows were $34. Crude oil has not quite, but almost doubled in 4 months, 4 and a bit months. But I think it will be interesting up at these levels. Clearly, what was the peak? The peak back in April was just above 66.5, 66.50. So we're only about 70 cents away from that at the moment. And after that, who'd have thought we could be talking about maybe $70 crude before not too long, when it was $10 in April last year. So there we go. Crude oil still strong. That OPEC decision to not increase production definitely helping. Any weakness looks like a buying opportunity. I would not be going short up here, but if you want to, knock yourself out. But an incredible trend for crude oil. Now let's take a look at gold and silver. I think I did say, I think I said last week, I haven't traded gold in my own account for a while, because I find it quite a frustrating market. This is where we were last week, the 25th, 26th, and we were breaking below those lows, which was big support at 1760. And it's gone lower. It's currently 1697. It moved lower already today for the move down. So today it traded to its lowest since June last year. So what's that? A 7-month low, isn't it? Something like that. 9-month low. But it's interesting down here. I think the confusing thing, or the conflicted thing for me with gold, that means there are easier markets to trade, or there have been easier markets to trade, is we've got these two opposite trends going on. We've got the long-term trend from August of last year, of 2018, sorry. That's still in place. And the long-term trend for gold is still up. But since the all-time highs last summer at 2060 or 2070, whenever it was, it's been down. I think it's interesting down here. It's an interesting one for next week to see if these old lows from April, around about 1660, and again in June, 1669, if they continue to hold. So I think maybe next week we could think about gold building a base. Would I buy it? No, I wouldn't buy it because it's still weak for me personally. I mean, clearly nothing today is financial advice. You make up your own mind to take your own risk. But for me, it doesn't fit the criteria for buying because it's still weak. But let's see what happens over the next week. Let's see what happens this time next week. Do we see it hold above 1660? Let's see. I think that's the next level to watch. I think if we see it lose 1660, then the risk is we get a pullback into late March levels below 1600. So let's see what happens. So when I talk about support levels, I've just seen a quick question come in. It just means previous highs and lows that were important. Previous lows where we can see gold in April last year, May, and again in June. Whenever we saw gold getting knocked back towards 1660, we'd see the buyers come out. So the market saw value in gold at 1660. Is that going to be the case this time round? Let's see. Let's see what happens over the next week. And I think with these sort of things, it pays to be patient. It can often be hard to be patient, difficult to be patient. But I want to be patient and see, does it bounce around 1660? Or is it just going to go sailing through? Let's see what happens. And silver, which again I said is a market, I'm not a fan of silver. Silver is by far and away the most popular video we put up. I don't know why. But people, and if you read the comments, if you've never read comments much on a YouTube video, if you read them on silver videos, people are really passionate about either hating it or loving it and buying actual silver coins rather than buying paper silver like an ETF. I have to say I don't care. But it's quite incredible that silver is so popular because I think it's not been the most exciting market in recent weeks and recent months. I think it's interesting because it's had a trend from the March lows. The March lows down around 11, pushed up to 30 in August last year, chopped around a little bit sideways since then. It's falling out of that trend at the moment, a bit like gold for me. Maybe there's support coming in at 24 on silver, so maybe it'll slip a bit lower into next week, and perhaps there'll be an opportunity there to be a buyer. But for me, as someone who wants to follow sort of fairly strong trends, it's been a little bit sort of scrappy, it feels, since September last year. We do get, I think the bias for silver is still up and lots of support running from 22 to 24. But I think from a trading point of view, I think there have been more interesting markets than silver. But it is interesting what's going on today with that fall through the trend and getting knocked back to where we were in late January. So we'll see. That's silver. So maybe a bit more weakness next week for these precious metals, but perhaps they start to get interesting again. Now let's talk about FX. I think FX, there's a lot to talk about when it comes to FX. What I'm going to start with, a market that not many people trade. Whenever we do a video on it, there's never much interest. But I think it's a really interesting market to watch at the moment. It is the dollar index. So it is the US dollar against a basket of different currencies. The main one is the euro, but it's a whole load of other currencies as well. I can never remember what it is. It does actually say on the platform, actually, if I'm going to be, there we go, if I scroll down here. Dollar against the euro, the yen, the pound, the Canadian dollar, the Swedish krona, the Swiss franc. So there we go. And I've been saying, are we seeing a base building for the US dollar? Blah, blah, blah. The dollar index touched 104 in March. It slid as low as 89 in early January. Was it building a base? Is it going to recover? It has today pushed up to its best levels since November. Now, if we see more strength in this US dollar index, that should, in theory, put pressure on gold, put pressure on silver, the pound, the euro, all of that. And of course, you can trade it. You can trade the US dollar index the same way you can trade any other market. So I do just wonder are we seeing a turnaround for the US dollar? There's the trend from whenever it is, March. And here's the price action lately. Really interesting market to watch. DXY is the code. But let's get into it. Let's get into looking at individual FX pairs. The euro, I thought we were going to get a euro bounce this week. I didn't do any trades on it. But I did think, and here, whenever that was, the 2nd of March, Tuesday, wasn't it? I think, when we saw it bounce away from the previous lows at 119.50 and bang, the last 3 days with this dollar strength, the euro has got clobbered. And we're back on the euro to trading where we were in November last year. So again, I think it's quite a confusing one at the moment for the euro. We do have this trend, this trend that's been running since March. The euro accelerated away from it in May, and then we accelerated again in November. So I do think there will be a buying opportunity for the euro, but I don't think it's yet. Again, we've got these conflicting trends. So for me, big support for the euro down at 116, which are the lows from September and also in November. Lots of pockets of support on the way, 118. So I think it's interesting over the next week. I'd be tempted to try and be a buyer, but I'd be patient again. I don't want to stand in the way of what is at the moment. If we flip this over to a shorter term chart, something of a runaway train downwards in euro US dollar. But I think an interesting one for me to sit on the sidelines and watch, because I am expecting strength to come back, but we're not getting it yet. Let's see what happens. Let's take a look at the pound, and we'll take a look at sterling yen as well, my favorite market of the moment. Pound against the dollar. See, I thought again, you see this, I'm surprised. Well, you should never be surprised, I suppose, but I did think when we had this going on, we're holding, if we had looking at it a few days ago, we're holding above the trend line here. Let's get ready to run back up to 142, but we've not had that. So again, the pound is slipping below. I'm not quite sure. I think that trend is a bit hanging in midair, but I think I've taken take off these lows here. Again, I think the pound, could well running into an area where we've seen lots of support before, at sort of 135.70 and upwards. So again, I wouldn't go short here because it's only a couple of weeks ago it moved to its best level in nearly 3 years. So I do think we're going to get a snap back up for the pound, but it's not going to be today. So again, I think I want to be a bit patient and see, well, do we see it perhaps next week? If things do calm down, do we see it start to form a base? We have a more sensible level for stops. Let's see what happens next. Okay, so I think that's it's an interesting one for next week. So, but because of this dollar strength, that's why we are seeing the euro and the pound under pressure, and the Aussie dollar as well. There was a great trend in the Aussie dollar. It's been a great performer, the Aussie, because it's a commodity-driven economy. Commodities have been doing very well. We'll have a look at some commodities today as well. But again, over the last couple of days, I think I came out of all of my Aussie dollar positions. I did have some trades on. I think I got stopped out at the last one this morning for a profit, a smaller profit on that one. But again, I think that's an interesting one to watch next week, because just before the Aussie pushed up to that high at 880 or 8,000, whatever, we had a good support down at 75. It's traded as low as 76.20 today. I think it's another one to watch next week. So much for next week from a currency point of view does hinge on this US dollar recovery. Let's see what happens. And then just very quickly, sterling yen. So again, I said someone mentioned this 3 weeks ago. I actually did end up doing a trade on sterling yen. Did another trade this week on sterling yen. And it did yesterday push up, because of course we've got no US dollar in this equation. This is for the pound to go up and the yen to fall. Pushed up to its best levels yesterday since back here, sterling yen, 2018. So nearly a 3-year high. So again, it's interesting. It's quite, overextended at the moment. Do we see it under a bit of pressure? But that's been for me. This and oil have been so far in March. I think we're only a week into it. The best trades for me. Let's take a quick look at dollar yen before we'll take a look at Bitcoin next. Dollar yen. Look at that. Do you remember? I think I was saying last week, we should have bought it back. I should have bought it back here. Didn't buy it. So we're seeing great US dollar strength, great yen weakness. So again, the question is it overextended up here? Are we going to get something of a US dollar correction? And we get, if it sells off down to 106, it'd be a great entry for a dollar yen long. Let's see what happens. Right, Bitcoin. Then we'll do commodities. Then we'll jump into the questions. Where is it? Bitcoin. So again, clearly in the UK, I'm not allowed to trade Bitcoin. None of us are in the UK on a leveraged basis using contracts for difference or spread betting. But I've still got the chart on my platform, but I can't trade it on here. But you can still, of course, if you're not regulated by the FCA, you can still do it. Or you can trade the physical Bitcoin. There's not a lot to say, really. I think that the trend is still up. The trend since last year is still up on Bitcoin. February the 21st, a couple of weeks ago, it hit all-time highs at 58,000. Got knocked back. We did do a Bitcoin video yesterday. I'll talk about it in a bit more detail in yesterday's Bitcoin video on the channel. This is why it's hard to trade, I think, for me anyway. It goes from 58,000 the 21st of February. A week later, it goes to 43,000. It moves $15,000, so nearly 30% in a week. That is pretty big volatility, isn't it? It is a bit of a crazy market, but I suppose that trend is up. Even if Bitcoin goes back to 32,000, the trend is up, and there's loads of support down at 28,000, 28 to 32, big support for Bitcoin. If you wanted to trade it now, what would you do? I'd probably be a buyer and put a stop loss if I was doing like a short-term trade and treating it like any other market. A stop loss perhaps underneath these. That was good support, 43-ish, 43.8. It did blip down to 43. If I was buying it now at 48,220, I'd probably have my stop loss the other side of 43,000. So it's what's that? A $5,000 stop, 10% stop, but it can move 30% in a week. So I do think we'll see it push back up towards 52,000 next week. Let's see what happens. We'll come back to it and see what happens with that one. Let's take a look at some commodities, and then we'll go into the questions. Copper. I've traded this a lot. I think I've said before, I've traded it a lot. I've taken the way I trade. I trail at my stops to take profits. I'm completely out of copper now because of this sell-off from the highs. I'd definitely personally be looking to get back in again next week. So copper has had this great run, this great trend from March last year, from around 2. Recently, traded as high as 4.36, up at those sort of levels. Pretty vicious week, but a big day today. If you're a fan of candlesticks, this candle today is bullish engulfing. So a bullish engulfing candlestick can signal a change in sentiment. So this could signal the end of the downwards correction. Let's see. It's just one day. It's just one candlestick. An aggressive trade, maybe this is the trade we'll do. An aggressive trade on copper would be to be a buyer now, for example, with a stop loss under yesterday's low. Yesterday's low is 385. But it's interesting. The trend in copper is still up. I'd personally like it to tick a little bit lower next week and get a bit of a better entry point. But that is, it's quite a big move. I suppose, looking on the intraday chart here, you could argue that the short-term trend, look at that. That's still down, isn't it? From the 25th of Feb high. So again, for me, I am going to be patient and see what happens next week. But that bigger trend is definitely still up in copper. So it's a really interesting market, I think, going into next week to see what happens with copper. So what I'll do now, we'll look at some of the questions. But just to recap, I think it's going to be interesting to watch where stock markets end today. Okay, so here's the NASDAQ. The NASDAQ is, oh, look at that. It came right back to the payroll lows, and it has bounced. You see, it's still looking a bit nervous, the NASDAQ. So let's see where stock markets end the day today. Do they manage to hold above the lows, or do they slip further? So I think we have to watch these and watch some of these old support levels from back there. So I think that's really interesting to watch. The US dollar index, I really do think it's a fascinating market for this year if we see a dollar comeback, and because the impact it has on the pound. So I'll be watching that next week, the pound and the euro. Do we see some stability come in? And crude oil just continues to run. You know, it'd be great to get a decent pullback on crude oil to the low 60s. Let's see what happens. But let me jump into the questions and go back and have a look at some of the stuff you want to look at. Tips for Brent oil. Well, we did look at US crude here, didn't we? It's pretty much, obviously it's different product, but it's the same sort of trend. Let's take a quick look at Brent crude just to see where we are on the UK version, I should say. So the UK Brent is trading at 68. Hasn't taken out the January 2020 highs. That's interesting. So the 2020 highs for Brent crude were about $70.60. So let's see, does that end up being a problem for Brent crude, and it calms down some of the strength we're seeing in WTI crude? But again, you know, you can't argue with these trends. I'm sure lots of people have been going short these markets, you know, trying to pick the top, and it's great when you get it right, but in a runaway market like this, you know, you don't want to be the wrong side of some of these crazy moves. So still strong, a really strong move in oil. What else have we got? Wheat. Let's have a look at wheat. I've still got a trade on wheat. Don't think it's done much. Here we go. It's been a little bit flat. So I'm still long wheat. I did think it was picking up a bit this week, but that trend in wheat from August last year pushed out to, I don't know how many years high that is in earlier this year. Back to where it was. 9-year high in wheat we had earlier this year. It sold off. I'm still bullish. I'm still long. So I'd still be looking for a run back up to those old highs and maybe even higher. If it starts breaking below these old lows at 195, I've been a bit worried. But for me, still bullish wheat, but just a little bit boring at the moment. Buying opportunity in platinum. Good question. I think I've closed all my platinum this week as well. I think platinum's taken a bit of a hit this week, isn't it? But again, I think it's interesting, you know, because it's a bit like, you know, the price action is a bit like the NASDAQ, where we've got a trend, it's slipped below the trend, but the price of platinum, January to February, until it went a bit crazy in February, spent a lot of time from 1,000 to 1160. So we're back in this zone now. So after this bout of craziness into the middle of February, does it start to build a base down here? It's looking quite low on the RSI, not quite oversold on the RSI, but do we have perhaps a more sensible week next week that we build a base? So I think it is interesting. Platinum down at these levels. Natural gas is, I think I've still got a trade on natural gas. I did think it was recovering earlier this week, and it's completely not, I think is the best way. So we'd had these various trends on natural gas. I had been following this trend, and it was doing okay until the middle of Feb. It's fallen out of that trend, and it's just sort of stalled now. We've got big support on natural gas down here, 227, 218. It's just gone a bit nowhere, hasn't it, natural gas at the moment? I'm still long. I think I've moved my stop to break even, which is probably around here somewhere. So I'm just going to have to wait it out and see what happens next. But it looks like that trend has definitely stalled, I think, in natural gas at the moment. S&P 500, we looked at that. Physical gold, we talked about golds, didn't we? What else have we got? Gold and silver, yeah, we did that. Gold and silver, we did that. Apple, let's have a look. Let's have a look at Apple, because because clearly the NASDAQ has taken the bigger hit, isn't it? And I think a lot of these tech stocks, clearly we'll look at Tesla soon as well, have taken some hits. And it's the same story. We had these pretty solid trends. They've fallen out of their trends. Is it the start of a downtrend? I would say, I still think no, just because it's fallen out of the uptrend. I think the aggressive trade on Apple would be, let's do it. I keep talking about doing a trade and we don't do any, do we? Is to maybe look at being a buyer. We've dribbled back to the lows from December, which were around about 120 on Apple. It's had a little look below it, and it's trying to hold. So I'm going to do a trade. I'm going to take the view. It's fallen out of the trend, but that doesn't mean the trend's over. It just means for now at least, until and if we break lower, we're just going to go up at a bit of a lower rate. So I'm going to be a buyer of Apple, and I'm going to put a stop loss underneath the November the 24th low, which is 112.5. So I'll go 110. So we'll buy Apple 110. Whenever we do the trades on here, we normally risk losing 100 quid, don't we? So that is 15. Okay, 14 shares of Apple, where it's trading now. A stop at 110, so you can see it here, down here. If it breaks down to there, I'd have to change my mind. Arguably, a slightly better stop is a bit wider, below 102. But let's go 110 for now and buy it and see if we get some sort of a bounce back today. Let's see how that one works out. But it's interesting because they've all just been sort of knocked out of their uptrends. So let's see. Coffee. Let's have a look at coffee. Coffee started getting a move, and I think I said a couple of weeks ago, coffee had been the longest trade I'd had. I think I'd been in the trade since I think March or April, sometime this year, about here somewhere, and it just gone up and gone down and gone nowhere. And it had a real run this week, but it stalled again ahead of the December 2019 high. So for me, and look how weak it's been, we've had, 5 days of selling in coffee. So for me, I'd be tempted to think about being a buyer again, but I'd want to see some strength first. And where the closest I'd want my stop at the moment, if you went the other side of the 2021 lows at 117, so the lows for the year so far, I think that's a good area. But for now, I don't want to buy it when every day it's just making a new low for the move. So again, I think it's another really interesting market to watch next week. I've got a feeling I'm not in that trade anymore. Let me have a quick look. No, I came out of it. So I was trailing my stop up. So I think it's an interesting one to watch next week to see if we get a bit of stability again, coffee, because it did actually wake up and have a bit of a run. Gold and silver, we looked at those. Dollar yen, we looked at that. Crude oil, everyone likes crude oil. Apple, CCIV. CCIV. Did we look at that last week and we didn't cover it? I can't remember. Is it that one? Churchill Capital. Okay, no idea what they do. Let's have a look. It intends to effect a merger stock exchange. Oh, is it one of these SPAC companies, isn't it? SPAC companies, I think. Well, we've only got however much data we've got there, about 2 weeks worth of data. It's been going down. It's gone from 33 to 22, hasn't it? So for me, it's not much data anyway. So I don't know. Dave Portnoy said he bought shares in it. It just looks. Oh, it's another Wall Street Bets one. Another Wall Street Bets stock. It just looks really weak to me. It's gone. It's dropped. 30% in 2 weeks. So for me, I'd want to see a bit of stability before being a buyer personally. And we don't exactly have a lot of information to go on, do we? So for me, it's a bit of a nothing one. How are your trades? Can you show us? Yeah, I think I did this right at the beginning. So the crude oil is making the most money. Pound against the dollar, losing. Silver, losing. Alibaba, remember that short we did ages ago, it feels like now. End of Jan and Alibaba did a short in a live stream. So that's started falling. Cotton is up slightly. I should have moved the stop on that, given back a lot of profit on this cotton trade, I think. Facebook, a long from the 15th of January. Can't even remember that. Bought that. That's up. And Apple, the one we just did, we're down about £7 so far on Apple. So so oil still the big winner, and I should pay a bit of attention to this after the live stream, because look where the stop losses on oil are. They're at $58 and $56. So there's a lot, and the market's at 65. So I need to move those stops up. So I'll do it later on. Virgin Galactica, of course, the space tourism business, isn't it? Virgin Galactic. I remember them being a big riser not so long ago. Wow, look at that. Great lesson that it's not a profit until you take it. So I think, again, I think, was it another popular Reddit type stock? So pushed up to $62.70, February the 4th, $26.85 today. Look at that. That really is coming back to earth, isn't it? But for me, it's quite interesting when we start to see some stability again. Let's wait for it to not be going down anymore, and then maybe it starts to look interesting. Virgin Galactica. So we could sort of plonk a bit of a trend in, couldn't we? I think we clearly, before it took off, $22.50 was a floor. We're only $4 away from that now. I think it's going to be really interesting the next couple of weeks. Let's come back to our next week's live stream and see if it's stabled at all. See what happens. Apple, we did Apple. Tesla. Let's look at Tesla. So were they $600 yesterday? $583 today. I did sell my. I think I did say I sold my 2 shares in Tesla at $750. But it's getting interesting again because we're coming back to this longer term trend for Tesla. So going back to March of last year, so 12 months. 12-month trend for Tesla comes in at $500. So let's see what happens. So again, I wouldn't be a buyer yet because it's still going down. You know, just for me, who am I to say where the bottom's going to go? Where every day this week it's made a new low. It's gone lower than the day before. So for me, I would not be a buyer today. But I think it gets interesting if it does get back. If we start seeing some stability ahead of 500. It's a really interesting one, that, isn't it, Tesla? But still weak. Still weak. Why do you stop loss and not hedge? That's a strange question. I don't really understand that question. I wouldn't hedge. I stop loss because I'm wrong and I'm out of the trade. I don't want to complicate the loss I've made on the trade by trying to hedge it. You know, if I'm buying it and I'm wrong, I want to get out and move on to something else. I think people tie them. I have seen people think they can hedge their way out of trouble. New retail traders, and I just think you end up tying yourself up in knots. So for me, if a trade's losing, it's losing, and I'm out. Gold, we looked at gold. Natural gas, looked at natural gas. Silver and copper, we looked at all of those. Euro sterling, let's take a look at euro sterling. Someone's saying that they're getting hit because of the vaccine thing. I don't think it's really helping, is it? Some of the stuff going on in continental Europe with the vaccines, with I think there's been a lower take-up, hasn't there? Because they were initially, was it against the AstraZeneca? Was it Macron and was it Merkel? I can't remember. Did initially speak out against the British vaccine and have had to backtrack and whatever. So euro sterling, I could argue, or it could be argued, there's a trading opportunity in euro sterling if you were so inclined. I must admit, it's not one I trade much at all, actually, because it's pretty dull a lot of the time. But I suppose you could take the view, an aggressive trade on euro sterling is to be a buyer now. So the market's at 86.15. We had this period where it just fell and fell and fell. We saw it trade down to 85.38, 24th of Feb. Bounced, come back, retest. If I was doing a trade now, I'd be a buyer with a stop loss the other side of this low. Let's take a look on the hourly chart and see what that looks like. There we go. So we had this spike low, sells off, rallies, comes back, and we're sort of trading now around 86.15. So I think it's interesting. So perhaps we've seen the worst of the slides for the euro against the pound. And perhaps we'll see something of a euro recovery against the pound. But for me, I'd trade it with a stop underneath that low, which is 85.38. So it's about 75 points away from where we are now. But again, you know, if we see the euro recover back into its trading range, it's a 400-point move. So in terms of risk reward, it's definitely interesting down here, euro sterling. Right, Tesla. We had a look at Tesla, didn't we? We looked at that. We looked at Apple. We don't have 10-year notes on here. American Airlines and Delta. We did look at Delta. Looked pretty good, didn't we? We looked the other week at Delta. American Airlines didn't look as good. Let's take a look on the dailies, because with American, because I think we looked at it when it was sort of spiking up or had spiked up to these old highs at 22. I suppose it's interesting because if it breaks 22, 20, let's say $23, it looks interesting up there, but it's backed away from it again, hasn't it? $23 seems to be a real line in the sand for American Airlines. It's really struggled. So perhaps we get, you know, something of a pullback. I think Delta looked the better, but clearly that's backed away as well. I think if we did see some weakness in Delta, back to that trend, that, you know, we've got lots of support for Delta from $37.50. So I think it looks interesting if we see a bit more weakness from here back to these levels. What I'll do, I'm just going to put my contact details up, and we'll go back into it in case anybody disappears. Obviously, go to Capital.com to find out more about the company. Go to davidjones@Capital.com is my email if you have any questions. @JonesTheMarkets is me on Twitter, and follow Capital.com on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. And I did say last week I did do a YouTube page. It's davidjonestrading.com. So I do put some little thoughts up during the week on that. So davidjonestrading.com is my page on Facebook, or any general trading questions, just drop me an email. Right, let's get back into it. So Delta looks interesting if it falls a bit from here. Copper and natural gas, Bitcoin did that. Pound against the dollar. I'm not quite sure what's happening with the chat box. It just suddenly jumped. We carry on scrolling through. China blue chips. Oh, we did that. We looked at that this week, didn't we? I looked at the China A150. We did a video earlier this week, which I actually learned quite a bit from this video. I'm to do the research in the video. It was recovery with inflation. We looked at the China A50. Again, 2.9 thousand views versus 43,000 for silver. This is much more interesting. But the China A150, it's the Chinese blue chip stock market index, and I thought it was really interesting because it's pulled back to that trend line. It's come right, so that trend line for the China A150 goes from the March 2020 lows, traded up to 20,600, and has lost 3,000 points in the last couple of weeks or so. So I think that's a really interesting market, the FTSE China A50, going into next week, as with all these other stock markets. So if you wanted some China exposure, the China A150 is an interesting one to look at. So let's see what happens next week with China. What about some chatting about the NFP report today? I didn't really watch it, to be honest. It beat expectations, those payrolls, and beating expectations. You can always look at it a couple of ways, can't you? Oh, the Nasdaq's really losing it now. Oh dear me! I don't think we're going to get a bounce today. You could say, on the one hand, a stronger than expected jobs report like today, you would say, okay, it shows the economy is strong. That's a good thing, and you'd expect stock markets to go up. And in other times, they would go up. But perhaps today, because we've had that stronger than expected jobs report from the US, and everyone is a bit worried about the US Fed pulling stimulus to support the economy, arguably a stronger than expected jobs report gives the Federal Reserve, the US Central Bank, more reason to stop supporting the economy, because the economy is strong because we've got more jobs than expected. And I think that's why we're seeing a bit of quite a tug of war going on today, aren't we? Look at this. This is back on the Nasdaq again. So when the payrolls came out, it was 12,500, drops 120 points, then rallies 250 points, and now it's dropped 250 points, and the market's only been open not even an hour. So a lot of confusion. So I think let's let the dust settle on that today. But I do think let's say we saw a weak finish for the Nasdaq today. I still think it might be interesting to see if we get a bounce. But I think if we saw it finish below yesterday's low, it does look a bit more precarious going into next week, and I might have to tone down my bullishness. But should we do a trade on the Nasdaq? Should we just jump in the way of the runaway market? What I'm going to do, so let's say, and I wouldn't do this with my own account, I'll do it with Capitals. The low yesterday was 12,310. The market's 12,360 at the moment. It's a really volatile market. Maybe we get a punch through 12,300 and a recovery from there. So I want to give the market a bit of room. Let me go. Where's the market now? 12,360. Let's say we go 12,240 on a stop. So I give it a bit of room to punch through those lows. And it really is getting hammered now. Look at it. 12,240 is the trade we'll do. And we'll do 1.2. It's really jumping around a lot. Let's take that thing off. I've got to keep adjusting my size because the market keeps running around so much. All right, let's do that. 12,240, bang, done. Okay. So we bought the Nasdaq at 12,357. It's just a little bit crazy today, isn't it? Let's see. We'll come back to it before we finish. So I think you could take today's payrolls in two ways. You could see, well, surely we've got a strong economy, but actually, does the Federal Reserve use that as an excuse to stop supporting the economy? Let's see. Let's see what happens. Norwegian Cruise Line, okay? Norwegian Cruise Line. That's a bit of a special interest one for a Friday afternoon. Norwegian Cruise Lines. Here we go. Oh, what happened there? 33 pounds, or not pounds, probably krona, whatever it is, yesterday, and 28 today. What do you think? What do you think? Do you feel lucky? Well, I must admit, I would be looking to be a buyer. Okay, we've had. It's a trend not dissimilar to the trend we've seen in. Oh, they've done a share offering, haven't they? Is that what they've done? Like a rights issue or something? It's a trend not dissimilar to the one we've seen in airline stocks, US airline stocks, and the trend did hit its best levels yesterday. Got knocked back today. I'd be quite tempted if we get a bit of stability in that one to look to see if there's a buying opportunity. But let's see. It's quite an interesting one to come back to next week. New Zealand dollar, US dollar. New Zealand dollar, US dollar. We normally run these for about an hour, so I'm going to give it maybe another 5 or 10 minutes. But if there's a load more questions, I will continue. The trend is up, isn't it? New Zealand dollar, US dollar. It's been knocked back. It traded up end of February to its best levels since 2017, almost. Yeah, 2017. So again, a bit like the Aussie dollar, I would be tempted. That one for me is one to watch next week to see if we get some stability, see if it's a buying opportunity with a stop loss under 7,100. I think for that one. Let's see. I bought Tesla at 720 and now it's 580. Should I sell my position now? Only you can decide on that. But I think I think we've all done it. And it's an important lesson that if you're trading something, and I would say the same for investments as well, but if you're trading something, it's absolutely critical you know where you're going to get out before you get in, would be my advice off that. And I think we've all done it. You're not alone, but it's completely up to you whether you hang on to it or come out of it. Good luck, whatever you decide. GameStop, of course, the famous Reddit stock. I don't even have a clue where it's trading now. 130. I've got no idea. I think, like I've said on numerous occasions, I think these are just fruit machine shares. Yeah, you put your money in, you might hit the jackpot. You probably won't hit the jackpot. So GameStop, absolutely just as crazy as it ever was. GameStop. So no, I mean it's just ludicrous, isn't it? So to me, if you're in it, good luck. Good luck with it. Can we have a look at the VIX? Yes. Is the VIX? You'd think the VIX is picking up, wouldn't you? So it's the volatility index. So it's down a bit today. So the VIX is also known as the fear index. It's based off S&P options volatility and is a way of the market sort of giving its expectation about volatility in the future. You'd have thought with markets getting hit as hard as they were that the VIX was maybe jumping around a bit more, but clearly it's not. So it has these moments like last year, obviously, February, March last year, it went from 15 to nearly 100. And we get these spurts along the way. I must admit, I don't trade the VIX because you have times where it just goes nowhere. Then you get a one-day spurt and then it just dies again. So it's ticked up over the last week or so, as you'd expect, because the market has ticked up. But I don't know. It's not reacting how I thought it might do. I think we're getting absolutely clobbered on that NASDAQ trade by the look of it. I'm watching. Oh no, we're not. We're up. We're up on the NASDAQ trade. Maybe it's the crude oil that's coming back. So we're up a bit. It seems to be changing really quickly. It's crazy markets. Gold. We looked at gold. Yeah. My account shows 19,900 instead of 199 for Apple shares. It's confusing. If you're trading on spread betting, that's what it would show. And all it's doing, it's just showing it to the cents. Yeah, that's what it's doing. It's not, so it's showing it to the cents rather than 119 a share. So it's showing it in cents rather than in just dollars. Norwegian Cruise Line, crude oil. A good stop loss on sterling yen. Good question. I don't know. I mean, I've got 2 trades running on sterling yen at the moment. For me, for my open positions, it's getting clobbered a bit at the moment. It probably, if it falls below 147.40, I'd be out of all of them. A shorter term stop loss, I suppose, if we were going to trade, sterling yen now, where would your stop loss go? Probably the closest I'd want it below the lows from the 3rd of March, so below 148.90. So about 50, 60 points below here. But it's quite weak. It's getting a bit of pressure this afternoon, isn't it, sterling yen? So let's see. Let's see what happens. Walmart. Let's have a look on Walmart. I think they got hit, didn't they? We did a trade on those. I think it must have got stopped out in Walmart. Yeah, God, they got really hit. Walmart. So I think we did a trade about here and got stopped out. So this is another one where I suppose if you go right back, you could still argue the longer term trend is up. But it's so weak at the moment. I suppose we could say something like that, couldn't we, on Walmart? It's trading at its lowest since, well, July last year. It's got really hit, hasn't it? So I think for me, that would be an interesting one because it's been hit so hard. I wouldn't necessarily go short now, but I'd be watching to see, do we see some stability come back in to Walmart? So let's see. Do you have any long-term holdings? Yeah, I do. Like everybody, I've got, well, like a lot of people, I've got pensions. I've got funds in that I don't pay enough attention to. And I have, I buy ETFs for longer term stuff like NASDAQ and S&P tracking ETFs. So I don't just do trading stuff. I do shorter term stuff. Do you think this pullback will last months or days? No idea. At the moment, I think it's going to be days, but you could argue we are well overdue considering the rise we've had. We're back on the NASDAQ now. We're well overdue a pullback in this market, and I think did I say the other week, one of the classic signs of a market top is where suddenly the wider public who wouldn't normally buy shares are buying shares, and I think clearly what we saw with GameStop, whenever it was, when it really went crazy in January, February, shows that there are much more, there are people investing in the market now who aren't normally in the market. Classic sign of a market top. So I would be, I still think we could see these markets bounce back from where we are now. I'm not expecting a crash, but I think we always have to be wary that things can go nasty fairly quickly. But for now, I'd be expecting some strength. But let's see what happens next week. Palladium. Let's take a look at Palladium. Palladium, and then I'm going to try and wrap it up in the next few minutes. So Palladium, that trend is still up in Palladium. It's not been as exciting, has it, as Platinum. That trend's still up. I think I've still got a trade on Palladium, I think, somewhere. It's been a bit boring, but the trend is still up. Lots of support running from these lows, 2160 lows, that sort of area, and that's that sort of levels. So for me, it's been quite boring, Palladium, really. I'm going to have to whiz through some of these questions now because I want to start wrapping things up. Sugar. So we look at sugar. This is another interesting commodity. Sugar US. Here we go. Another great trend in sugar. I think I've still got a couple of trades running in sugar. Fantastic trend. Again, it's had quite a knock the last few weeks or so. It's gone from about 1890 back to 1690, so it's lost 10% the price of sugar, pretty much. That's an interesting one to watch going back into next week. I would be quite tempted for my own trading. Clearly, you've got to make your own mind up. If we see the price hold today, do we see the price of sugar recover going into next week? So I think that's an interesting market to watch. So lots to watch because of what's going on. I am going to start wrapping things up now. Apologies if I couldn't get to your question, but I think after an hour, people's attention does start to waver a little bit. If you have any questions, drop me an email, david.jones@capital.com. Go to capital.com to find out more about the company. Loads to watch next week. FX markets because of this dollar strength. Stock markets because markets are spooked by rising bond yields and inflation. Will we see stability come back into stocks? Gold still weak, but we're back to levels from the summer where we did see stability. And commodities, because they've been knocked so much, will we see strength come back there? You can follow me on Twitter. I don't put that much on Twitter. My Facebook page. If you have any other questions, go to davidjonestrading.com and I'll try and answer them there as well. Clearly, I can't give financial advice, but I can offer opinions on trading. I think it's been a really weird start to the month. I was up a good amount yesterday, then I was negative for the month at the close of last night. At the moment, I'm pretty much flat for the month in terms of open positions and profit they're showing. So it's been a really volatile start to the month. It's been much harder for me this week than the last few weeks have been, because we've seen a lot more volatility in markets. Let's see how it works next week, if we see some stability coming in, or does the panic just ramp up again? Let's see. We'll cover it all again next Friday, 12:30, not 12:30 at all, 2:30 next Friday. We will put these videos up during the week, so please subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we can tip us over the 100,000 subscribers mark. Thanks again for coming. Sorry I couldn't answer all the questions. Maybe we'll look at rejigging things now these things are getting more popular. But really enjoy doing them. Thanks for the support. Good luck with your trading. Have a good weekend, and we'll do it all next Friday.